Hey, it's McDev. We are going to go over objects in JavaScript, and we're starting from the perspective of the beginning of a learning journey where you understand what a variable is, and maybe you understand what an array is, but objects are still a bit of a mystery. So you may have heard of objects described as key value pairs. You have a key, and then you have a value. So what is a key value pair? The easiest way to understand that is to use something that you already know, and that would be variables. So with variables, we have key value pairs. Now, if we look here at my screen on line 3, we have a variable called I'm a key, and its value is a string that says I'm a value. And so if we console.log, if I can type, um, we could just console.log the string I'm a value, right? And we're just console logging a value, and we get it to print out I'm a value. Well, the other thing we could do is we could reference the value by its key, called I'm a key. And so we can console log I'm a key, and it prints out the value. Cool. So with our object, we have an opening brace and a closing brace. And inside there, we have a key value pair. Now, we'll get into how we can access the items inside the object, but for now, I just wanted to kind of look at an object itself. Now, objects are really great for organizing information. And with objects, instead of, with a variable, you just have one key that's assigned to a value. But with an object, you can have multiple keys that are assigned to multiple values. And so let's look at an example where we have more than one key and more than one value. So here's an object. It's just like the one before it, except that now we have two different keys and two different values. Now, with a variable, we would have an equal sign here, but we don't. We have a colon. And then after that, once we reach the end of the value, instead of a semicolon, we have a comma. We have a comma because we can have multiple values. And so then we have the next item. We have the key, the colon, the value, the comma. So that's sort of the pattern. The value can really be anything, and we'll look at that here in a moment. What's really interesting is that you can nest objects together. And so we're going to look at a nested object. So here it's basically the same object. We have I'm a key, like we had up there. I'm another key. Then here I'm yet another key. The value here is an object. It's not a string like we've been using in the earlier examples. And so inside of here we've got these are terrible names. I should just call them something random like their values. Aardvark and Kiwi. And so inside this object, we have keys and values. And so really, we can go as many levels deep as we want to. Llama, and llama is going to be an object. And so we're going to go a level deeper, and etc. The way you could think of it is that pica right here is the child of llama, right? It's nested inside the llama element, parent element, child element. Llama is a child element along with kiwi and aardvark of I'm yet another key. You can think of it as like I'm yet another key is the grandparent of pica, llama is the parent of pica, and then pica is sort of the grandchild. So you could go on infinitely nesting things. And you wouldn't really want to do that unless you had a really good reason why to nest things. Because when you nest things, you increase complexity. And you only want to increase complexity if it's necessary. That's more philosophy than anything. Cool. So here I wanted to give you an example of all the different things you could store in an object. And this is probably not an inclusive list. Here we have an example of I'm a string. That's the key name. Hello, I'm a string. I'm a number, then the value is a number. I'm an array. I'm an object. Like we saw before, we can nest objects. I'm a function. And this one's interesting is you can actually nest an entire function in there. And I wanted to show you this with a little bit better formatting. I find that sometimes seeing new code concepts in different like formatting can sometimes be helpful. So this is the same thing. Cool. So really we can put anything in there. Now, in general, you probably aren't going to be mixing and matching all these different types of values. There might be a use for that, but it's more likely that your function, that your object will just have functions, or will just have numbers, or just have arrays, or just have strings. Here we are at how to access values from an object. Now, if you remember when we were up here, I talked about we were going to learn how to access the values. So if we remember, just if we're going to console log this variable right here, we just reference it by its key, i.e. its name. So we'll run the code. We get I'm a value. Now, if we want to access this value inside the object, we're going to have to do something special. Now, we could just print out the object itself, and that's going to be the entire object. So if we notice, we're console logging, we got the brackets, we have the key, and we have the value. This isn't what we want. This isn't necessarily useful. We want to access the actual key inside the object. So we're going to say dot I'm a key, and it's that dot notation right here is how we're accessing the item inside the object. We'll run it again, and here we see that we're accessing the item in the object. So one other way we can access items, and I don't recommend this unless you have something that's kind of forcing your hand when you're writing code that makes you need to do it this way. But you can access the item in an object using bracket notation. And so here, we're not going to say item 0 because that won't work, and we'll look at that later. Instead, we're going to say I'm a key. We're going to use a string. And so in order for this notation to work, we have the object, we have the brackets, we have the quotations, and inside the quotations, we have the name of the key that we're accessing. So let me ask you a question. This is a rhetorical question because this is a video and you can't really answer. But how would I access this function, this Mr. I'm a function here? Well, we're probably going to need to use dot notation, right? So this function, it console logs this phrase, I'm a function. And so if we call it, we would expect it, what our goal is to have the console print out I'm a function. So what we can say is the dot notation, right? I'm a function. What happens if we just run that? Nothing happens. Well, if you remember from working with functions, in order to call a function, you call it with its name, but then you also include the parentheses after it. And it's no different here in the object. So we're calling it by its name, we use the parentheses, and here we have the output, I'm a function. So this is going well. Here, we are just creating this recipe, and we make a variable for the recipe name, a variable for the ingredients, a variable for the directions, and then the cook time. And so then we have this great function that we're going to print out the recipe. We're going to print out the recipe name, followed by the cook time, and then we're going to print out the ingredients, and we have a for loop. It's just looping through the array that prints out each of the ingredients. And then finally, we're going to print out the directions. So let's go ahead and run this. Cool. So what we have here is pumpkin spice coconut bark. Cook time is 6 minutes. The ingredients is chocolate chips, pumpkin pie spice, coconut flakes, and almonds. And then it gives you the directions. So okay, so this is our project here. How could we refactor this code so that we used an object instead? So for now, we're going to remove this. I have it here, but I'm just going to go ahead and code it out. So we're going to call this const recipe. And so what do I do to create an object? What's the next thing I need to do? Well, I need to have the curly braces. And so what kind of items am I going to put in my recipe? Well, I could add my recipe name. And the recipe name is, I'm just going to copy and paste because that's what developers do. Pumpkin spice coconut bark. The ingredients, we need that. Copy our array of ingredients. We have our directions, and if you notice, I'm ending these with a comma. Need to end this with a comma. Have our directions. I'm not super worried about getting the whole list of directions, so I'm just going to end it like that. And then cook time in minutes. Very good. So now we have the recipe. And inside the recipe is very organized. We have you have the recipe names, etc. And so here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Now, this seems pretty organized, in my opinion. But is the function going to work the same way? If I run this, I think it's not going to like it. There's going to be an issue. Yeah, we get a bunch of errors. So why is this broken? Well, we notice that we're just asking for the recipe name, and recipe name has been removed. It's been commented out. I'll even delete it. So how are we going to access the recipe name? Well, we could access it at recipe.recipe name. And the same thing for the cook time. Recipe.cooktime. And here, this is interesting too. You see recipe.ingredients, and then on the ingredients, we're calling .length. It's the same thing as before, but it's nested inside of recipe, inside the recipe object. And here we're going to do the same thing, recipe.ingredients, recipe.directions. So now if we console log it, it works the same way as before. Here's a question that comes up a lot. Can I treat objects like arrays? So let's say we have an array, and the array is just this array with a bunch of strings in there. We can access the first item in the array by saying aardvark at index 0. So index 0 is this one, index 1 is this one, index 2 is this one. So at index 0, we can access aardvark. What if we did that for an object? Hey, I want the thing at index 0. That must be the something, right? Something is at index 0. That's going to give me aardvark. Well, let's find out. So here we have these two console logs. One of them is trying to get the index 0 of the array, and that works. It gives us aardvark. But when we try to get index 0 of the object, it says undefined. There is nothing at index 0 of the object. And so you might be asking, why can't I use index 0 on an array, which also means you can loop through an array that way, but I can't use index 0 on an object. And the reason for that is that in arrays, all of the items are indexed, right? They're identified by their index. So you have item at 0, 1, 2, 3. For objects, items are identified by their name. So arrays, everything is assigned to an index. Objects, they're named. And so it's kind of like the difference between an ordered list and an unordered list. Except in this case, it's the difference between a collection of numbered items where you have an index with them and a collection of named items. And so for an object, it doesn't really matter what order the items are in the object, because how you access them is by their name. You call them by their key. And so that that last bit there, I think, sums up what I have to share about objects. There's a lot more to learn about these. There's different methods and stuff that are specific to objects that are different than what you'd use working with an array, because as we can see, they're two different things. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and